Hi, I'm Dr. Shariff, a gastroenterologist based in Hertfordshire and practicing at OSD Inspire Healthcare. I want to talk to you today about reflux, which is a really common problem. In fact, reflux is a normal physiological thing that all of us have every day. It's normal for some of the gastric contents to come into the esophagus. It only becomes a condition when it starts causing symptoms, and then we call it reflux disease. And you may have heard of this. You may have heard of the acronym GORD or GERD, GORD or GERD. And that just stands for gastroesophageal reflux disease. It's GORD if it's in England, because we spell esophagus with an O, and GERD if you're in the US, because in America they spell it with an E. Now, it is normal, as I say, for stomach contents to come into the food pipe, but it's not normal to develop symptoms from it. And one commonly held misconception is that GERD or GORD is all about acid. Now, it is true that acid is a main part of the symptom, but we know that there are lots and lots of complex mechanisms that go on in controlling gastric secretions and your esophageal function. For example, you produce not just acid in your stomach, and that acid, by the way, is hydrochloric acid, but you produce other digestive juices. For example, you may produce pepsin, which is an enzyme which helps digest proteins, and you'll also have bile in the stomach. Bile is a digestive juice which helps digest fats. You'll have whatever you've eaten, and all of us have bacteria within our small bowel which can also produce fluid. And they can all mix up in the stomach and create a solution which, if moved back into the esophagus, can cause problems or symptoms. So there, it's not just about the acid. In addition, we know that the esophagus and stomach are not just hollow tubes. They are fully functioning active muscles, and they have a function to play. When you eat something, you chew it and digest it and swallow it. But to help it get down the food pipe, your food pipe will squeeze in what we call a peristaltic manner to help it push down the food into the stomach. Not that I would ever advise to do so, but if you have to eat standing on your head, then your esophagus still should be able to cope with pushing the food up the right way. But don't do that because you can choke. Similarly, the stomach is a very strong muscle which helps digest foods. It squeezes the foods together over many minutes, sometimes up to 1 to 2 hours, to help it create a mulch which you can then absorb more easily. If, for whatever reason, your stomach or your esophagus stop squeezing in a coordinated manner, then you can build up fluid in the wrong places, which can cause symptoms. We call this dysmotility, and it's very, very common and actually quite difficult to diagnose. Furthermore, there's a junction between your food pipe and your stomach, and there's a sphincter there. A sphincter is a valve which is made of muscle, which helps control fluid going the right way. It's called the lower esophageal sphincter between the stomach and the food pipe. If that sphincter, for whatever reason, is not working properly, and that can happen if you've got something called a hiatus hernia, where the stomach sits a bit higher in the chest than it should, then obviously any fluid in the stomach is going to be more likely to rise up into the food pipe. Finally, people's diets and medications can also make a difference to reflux, and there are psychosocial factors as well. So it's not all about the acid, it's in fact a whole complex mechanism of different interplaying problems and physiological aspects that you need to think about when someone has reflux. Therefore, the management is not all about switching off the acid. Firstly, what any doctor will take a history from you. When do you get the reflux? What's your diet like? What's your general health like? Because we know that certain things like being overweight, smoking, or drinking too much alcohol can increase reflux. There are certain foods as well which can make reflux worse. Things like chocolate, too much caffeine, too much carbonated drinks, too much chewing gum. And reducing any of those may help improve your reflux as well. Night can be a very bad time for reflux. And this is because you're lying down flat, so you haven't got gravity helping pushing down any fluid. And interestingly, also at night, you produce less saliva. Now, you may think saliva is not a very important aspect of your body, but in fact, in reflux, saliva helps neutralise any acid coming up from the stomach. At night, you produce less saliva, so the acid will be less neutralised. So night can be a pretty problematic time, and that's why we sometimes advise some people to sleep slightly propped up to stop the refluxate coming up the esophagus, and that can be helpful in a small number of people. Similarly, not eating too late before your bedtime can help as well. If you have an empty stomach, you're less likely to produce fluid which will come up the food pipe. If at any point we're worried about your reflux, and worried would mean that perhaps we think that it's caused a problem, like an ulcer in the food pipe, a narrowing, or even if we think you may be at risk of cancer of the food pipe, then a gastroenterologist like me may advise an endoscopy test. And an endoscopy test is where, usually with sedation, we look down with a thin flexible tube into the food pipe and into the stomach, where we can gauge the severity of the problem, take pictures, biopsies, and make a holistic assessment of the severity of the reflux and what we do next. Then we may suggest other manoeuvres like medications. Now, over the counter, you can get lots of medications for reflux, and the pharmacist can be a very good first stop. You have the alginate substances, which are gel-like substances, sometimes alkaline, which sit as a barrier across the top of the stomach, stopping the refluxate, and remember that's the acid, pepsin, food, fluid, bile, from coming up the esophagus. So they're very effective. After that, we may go on to try and switch off the acid. Now, acid is produced in quite a complex way in the stomach, but you can interrupt lots of the pathways with different medications. The most common of these are the proton pump inhibitors, where we switch off acid quite effectively. But there are other medications like histamine antagonists as well, which can help. If all of this fails, we may want to make a full assessment of your reflux by measuring how much acid is coming up during 24 hours with a special test. And if we really can't control things with medications, then there are surgical options available, which can help tighten the esophageal sphincter, or even put magnetic beads in the food pipe to help hold the sphincter closed, which may help in a certain small minority of people. But in conclusion, reflux is a really common problem. It's actually a normal physiological response, but in some people can be problematic, but a lot can be done to help with it, and you don't need to suffer with it.